Woman applies for job, then sees her mother's necklace in Millionaire's office. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the well-worn soles of her only pair of formal shoes. The black pumps had seen better days, but they were all she could afford. She carefully wiped the scuff marks with a damp cloth, her fingers trembling slightly. Today could change everything. Today could finally be her chance to escape the cycle of late rent notices and hollow-eyed nights spent worrying about her future. The sound of traffic drifted in through the cracked window of her studio apartment. The air inside was stale, but she couldn't afford to waste time on trivial comforts. Every dollar went to essentials, rent, food, and occasionally, the train ticket she needed to get to job interviews. Even the suit she was wearing wasn't really hers. She had borrowed it from Emily, her best friend, who had insisted that looking sharp was half the battle. Sophia glanced at the mirror. The reflection staring back at her seemed unfamiliar. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a tight bun, her lips painted in a soft but confident shade of mauve. It was a far cry from the usual tired woman she saw every morning. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to land this job, to finally feel like she belonged somewhere, like she could breathe without the crushing weight of financial strain. She reached for her bag and pulled out her mother's photograph. The image was slightly faded, the edges worn from years of being carried everywhere. Her mother's smile was radiant, her dark eyes full of life. Around her neck hung the necklace, elegant, simple, yet deeply meaningful. Sophia traced the outline of the chain with her finger. She could still remember how her mother would let her play with it as a child, the way it would catch the sunlight and sparkle. But that memory was bittersweet. The necklace was gone now, stolen in the chaos of her mother's passing. Losing her mother had been the first crack in Sophia's world, and losing the necklace felt like losing a piece of her mother's spirit. Her fingers lingered on the photograph a moment longer before she tucked it back into her bag. The subway ride to Callahan Enterprises was uneventful, but the nerves bubbling in her chest made every second feel like an eternity. She rehearsed her answers to potential interview questions under her breath, mouthing responses silently as the train rattled through the tunnels. The man seated across from her raised an eyebrow, but she barely noticed. She had bigger concerns than the judgment of a stranger. When the train pulled into her stop, Sophia stepped out into the bustling midtown crowd. The skyscrapers seemed to loom over her like towering sentinels, their glass exteriors reflecting the bright sunlight. She adjusted the strap of her bag and took a deep breath. Callahan Enterprises was only a few blocks away, but it felt like she was walking into the unknown. The building was magnificent, a testament to wealth and power. The polished marble floors in the lobby gleamed under the soft, ambient lighting. Sophia felt out of place the moment she stepped inside, her scuffed shoes clicking against the pristine surface. She approached the front desk hesitantly, her voice faltering as she gave her name. The receptionist barely glanced at her before gesturing toward the elevators. The ride to the top floor felt endless, the smooth hum of the elevator amplifying her heartbeat. Sophia clutched her bag tightly, mentally rehearsing her introduction again. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a hallway lined with glass panels that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. Her heels sank slightly into the plush carpet as she walked toward the office door. "Miss Sophia Reyes?" A polished voice called out. A tall, impeccably dressed assistant appeared, clipboard in hand. "Yes," Sophia replied, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat. "Yes, that's me." The assistant nodded and led her into a vast office. The room exuded sophistication, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. Shelves lined the walls, filled with rare books and artifacts. But what caught Sophia's attention was the display case near the desk. It was filled with an assortment of jewelry, and her heart skipped a beat when her eyes landed on one piece in particular. The necklace. Her mother's necklace. Or at least, it had to be. The delicate chain, the elegant pendant. It was unmistakable. The world around her seemed to blur as she stared at it, her pulse quickening. How was this possible? The necklace had been stolen years ago. What was it doing here, in this office, displayed like a trophy? "Miss Reyes?" The voice jolted her back to reality. Sophia realized Mr. Callahan himself was standing in front of her, his hand extended in greeting. She had been so focused on the necklace that she hadn't even noticed him enter the room. "Sorry," she stammered, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not overly so, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to study her intently. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Sophia sat down, forcing herself to focus. The interview began with Mr. Callahan asking her about her experience, her goals, and how she envisioned herself contributing to the company. But no matter how hard she tried, her gaze kept drifting back to the display case. Her answers came out halting and disjointed, and she could tell Mr. Callahan was noticing. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the desk. "You seem distracted, Miss Reyes. Is everything all right?" Sophia's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but her words caught in her throat. Should she say something about the necklace? Would he think she was crazy? "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just that necklace in the display case. It looks exactly like one my mother used to have." Mr. Callahan's expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. He glanced at the display case, then back at Sophia. "It's a unique piece," he said after a moment. "I acquired it years ago. It's one of my favorites." Sophia's heart sank. The way he spoke about it so casually, as though it were just another trinket in his collection, made her stomach churn. But she couldn't push the issue. Not now. The rest of the interview passed in a haze. Sophia answered his remaining questions as best she could, but her mind was elsewhere. When it was over, she thanked him for the opportunity and left the office as quickly as she could without seeming rude. The moment she stepped outside, the fresh air hit her like a wave, and she realized she had been holding her breath. Her thoughts raced as she walked to the subway station. She couldn't shake the image of the necklace, gleaming under the display lights. It had to be the same one. But if it was, how had it ended up in Mr. Callahan's possession? And why did he seem so evasive when she mentioned it? Sophia knew she wouldn't be able to let it go. She had to find out the truth. Sophia's mind was a whirlwind as she descended the steps into the subway station. The clamor of the city faded into a distant hum, her focus consumed entirely by the image of the necklace. She boarded the train almost on autopilot, finding a seat by the window. The subway car was sparsely populated at this midday hour, a few commuters engrossed in their phones, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a mother trying to soothe her fussy toddler. She pulled out her phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang twice before her friend picked up. "Hey Soph, how did the interview go?" Emily's cheerful voice was a welcome contrast to the turmoil Sophia felt inside. "It was fun, I guess," Sophia replied, biting her lip. "Just fine? Come on, tell me everything. Did you dazzle them with your charm and wit?" Sophia hesitated. "Emily, something weird happened?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" "I saw something in Mr. Callahan's office. A necklace. It looked exactly like my mom's, the one that was stolen." Emily was silent for a moment. "Are you sure? It could just be a similar design." "No, it was the same. It even had the engraving on the pendant, the one with the little crescent moon and stars. I couldn't get a close look, but I'm almost certain. That's unbelievable. What did he say when you mentioned it?" "I told him it looked like my mother's necklace, and he just said he acquired it years ago. He seemed off, like he didn't want to talk about it." "That is strange," Emily agreed. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to forget about it, but another part feels like I need to find out how he got it. That necklace was so important to my mom, and to me. Maybe you should do some digging," Emily suggested. "See if there's any connection between him and your mom." Sophia sighed. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Well, your mom used to work for that family before she met your dad, right? Maybe there's a link there." "Maybe," Sophia mused. "I think I need to talk to Aunt Margaret. She might know something." "Good idea. Keep me posted, okay?" "Will do. Thanks." As the call ended, Sophia felt a small measure of clarity. She needed answers, and the only person who might have them was her mother's sister. It had been years since she last spoke to Aunt Margaret. After her mother's death, the family had drifted apart, each dealing with the loss in their own way. But if anyone knew about her mother's past, it would be her. The train lurched to a stop, and Sophia realized she had missed her station. She sighed, getting off to wait for the next train heading back. The delay gave her more time to think. Memories of her mother flooded back. Her gentle laughter, the way she sang softly while cooking, the stories she told about her youth. But her mother had always been vague about certain parts of her past, especially anything involving her life before Sophia was born. When Sophia finally reached her apartment, she rummaged through her closet until she found the old box of her mother's belongings. Inside were photographs, letters, and a few trinkets that held sentimental value. She spread them out on the coffee table, sifting through each item carefully. A photograph caught her eye. It was of her mother in her 20s, standing in front of an elegant estate she didn't recognize. Beside her stood a young man, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a tree. Sophia squinted, trying to make out his features, but the image was too faded. She flipped the photo over. Written in her mother's neat handwriting were the words, "Summer at the Callahan Estate, 1985. Her heart skipped a beat. Callahan. The same name as the company where she had just interviewed. Could it be a coincidence? She quickly searched through the other photos and found more from the same period. Her mother at lavish parties, dressed in gowns that seemed out of place for someone of her modest upbringing. Sophia's hands trembled as she picked up a letter tucked among the photographs. It was addressed to her mother, the sender's name smudged, but the return address was clear, Callahan Estate. She carefully unfolded the letter, the paper brittle with age. The handwriting was elegant, each stroke deliberate. Dearest Elena, I hope this letter finds you well. The estate feels emptier without your laughter echoing through the halls. Father insists that I focus on the family business, but my thoughts are consumed by memories of our time together. I long for the day when circumstances allow us to be reunited. Yours always, Michael. Sophia's mind raced. Elena was her mother's name. And Michael, could that be Michael Callahan, the man she had just met? The timelines didn't quite add up. Mr. Callahan appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, which would align with someone who knew her mother in the 1980s. She sank onto the couch, the weight of the revelations pressing down on her. If her mother had a connection to the Callahan family, why had she never mentioned it? And what did that mean for Sophia? Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was an email notification. Dear Miss Reyes, thank you for taking the time to interview with us today. We were impressed with your qualifications and would like to offer you the position of junior analyst at Callahan Enterprises. Please let us know your decision at your earliest convenience. Best regards, HR Department. Sophia stared at the screen. The job offer should have been good news, a step toward the future she'd been striving for. But now, it felt complicated. Accepting the position would mean working closely with Mr. Callahan, a man who might be deeply entwined with her family's past. She needed to talk to Aunt Margaret. The next morning, Sophia stood outside a small suburban house, its garden overgrown but charming in its disarray. She hesitated before ringing the doorbell, uncertainty gnawing at her. It had been so long since she'd seen her aunt, and they hadn't parted on the best terms. But this couldn't wait. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a loose braid. Aunt Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. Sophia? My goodness, it's been ages. Hello, Aunt Margaret, Sophia said softly. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. Nonsense, come in, come in. Margaret stepped aside, ushering her into the cozy living room. The scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and Sophia felt a pang of nostalgia. Can I get you something to eat or drink? Her aunt offered. No, thank you. I actually came because I have some questions about Mom. Margaret's expression softened. I see. What would you like to know? Sophia took a deep breath. Did Mom ever work for the Callahan family? Margaret's eyes flickered with a hint of apprehension. She gestured for Sophia to sit. Why are you asking about the Callahans? I had an interview at Callahan Enterprises and I found some old photos and letters that suggest Mom knew Michael Callahan. Margaret sighed, settling into the armchair across from Sophia. Your mother and Michael were close once upon a time. How close? Sophia pressed. They were in love, Margaret admitted. But their relationship was complicated. The Callahans were a powerful family, and Michael's father didn't approve of their relationship. Why didn't Mom ever tell me? She wanted to protect you, Margaret said gently. After things ended with Michael, she met your father and tried to move on. She didn't see the point in dwelling on the past. Sophia's mind was reeling. Is there any chance that Michael Callahan is my... Margaret held up a hand. Your father is the man who raised you. But, biologically, it's possible that Michael is your father. The room seemed to tilt. Sophia gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles whitening. Why didn't anyone tell me? Your mother thought it was best this way. She didn't want you caught up in the Callahan family's affairs. And after your father passed away, she felt it would only complicate things further. Sophia felt a mix of anger and sadness. I have a right to know where I come from. I understand, Margaret said softly. But please be careful. The Callahans are not a simple family. Getting involved with them could bring more trouble than you realize. I've already been offered a job there, Sophia revealed. Margaret's eyes widened. Have you accepted it? Not yet. I don't know what to do. Margaret reached out and placed a hand over Sophia's. Follow your heart, but keep your wits about you. If you decide to pursue this, just be prepared for whatever you might uncover. Sophia nodded, her resolve hardening. Thank you, Aunt Margaret. As she left her aunt's house, Sophia felt a storm brewing inside her. The pieces of her life's puzzle were shifting, forming a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see. But one thing was clear, she needed to confront Michael Callahan and get the truth. Back at her apartment, Sophia sat down to compose an email. Dear Mr. Callahan, thank you for the job offer. I have some questions I need to discuss with you before I can accept. Please let me know when you are available to meet. Sincerely, Sophia. She hit send and leaned back, exhaling slowly. It was a risk, but she couldn't proceed without addressing the uncertainties that now overshadowed everything. An hour later, a reply came. Dear Miss Reyes, I appreciate your prompt response. Please come by my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss any questions you may have. Best regards, Michael Callahan. Sophia closed her laptop, a mix of anticipation and dread settling in her stomach. Tomorrow, she would face the man who might be her father, the keeper of secrets that had shaped her life without her knowing. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. Memories of her childhood mingled with imaginings of what could have been. Questions swirled. Did Michael know about her? Had he been searching for her? Or was she just another employee to him? Morning came too soon. Sophia dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel confident. As she rode the elevator up to Mr. Callahan's office once more, she steadied herself, ready to confront whatever truths awaited her. The assistant greeted her politely and led her to the office. This time, she noticed every detail: the subtle scent of polished wood, the soft ticking of an antique clock, the way the morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Callahan stood as she entered. Miss Reyes, please have a seat. Thank you, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He sat across from her, his expression unreadable. You mentioned you had questions? Sophia met his gaze directly. Yes. I need to know how you came into possession of that necklace. He leaned back slightly, his eyes searching hers. As I mentioned before, I acquired it years ago. It's a valuable piece. It's more than that, Sophia pressed. It belonged to my mother, Elena. She worked for your family in the 1980s. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Elena? Yes, I remember her. She was my mother, Sophia continued. And I believe there's more to this story than a simple acquisition. Mr. Callahan sighed, his composed demeanor slipping. Perhaps we should speak candidly. I think that would be best, Sophia agreed. He stood and walked over to the display case, opening it carefully. He retrieved the necklace and held it gently. This necklace has always been special to me. Why? Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because it belonged to someone I cared for deeply, he said, his gaze distant. Elena and we were very close. Were you in love with her? Yes, he admitted. But my family didn't approve. They forced us apart. I tried to find her later, but she had moved on, married. I respected her decision. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. Did you know she had a daughter? He looked at her, a mixture of hope and sorrow in his eyes. I heard rumors, but I wasn't sure. Are you? I'm her daughter, Sophia confirmed. And there's a possibility that you might be my biological father. Mr. Callahan closed his eyes briefly, emotion flickering across his face. I've always wondered. When I saw your application, your name, it stirred memories. Meeting you confirmed my suspicions. Why didn't you say anything? Sophia demanded. I didn't want to impose, he explained. I thought it best to proceed professionally unless you wanted to discuss it. Sophia stood up, the weight of the moment overwhelming. This is a lot to process. I understand, he said softly. I don't expect anything from you. But I would like the opportunity to get to know you, if you're open to it. She looked at the necklace in his hand. May I see it? Of course. He handed it to her gently. Holding the necklace, Sophia felt a connection to her mother, as if a missing piece had been restored. Tears welled in her eyes. I've missed this so much. Keep it, Mr. Callahan offered. It was always meant to be yours. She hesitated. I don't know. There's no pressure, he assured her. Take your time. Sophia took a deep breath. I need to think about all of this. Of course. And the job offer stands, regardless of your decision about this. She nodded, her mind a tumult of emotions. Thank you. As she left the office, the necklace clutched tightly in her hand, Sophia knew her life had changed irrevocably. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to navigate it on her own terms. Sophia walked out of the Callahan building into the crisp morning air, her thoughts heavy and scattered. The necklace, now resting safely in her bag, seemed to weigh more than it should, as though it carried the burden of all the unanswered questions she still had. Michael Callahan might be her father, but what did that mean for her? For years, she had built her life on the belief that her father was the man who had raised her, the kind and steady presence who had held her hand through her mother's funeral. Could she accept that there might be another story, one she hadn't asked for? She stopped at a small park on her way home, sitting on a weathered bench and pulling out the necklace. The sunlight danced across the pendant, highlighting the tiny crescent moon and stars engraved on its surface. It was unmistakably her mother's. Memories of her mother's warm laughter and gentle touch flooded her mind, and Sophia blinked back tears. She had so many questions she wished she could ask her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Emily. Emily, how did the meeting go? Did you find out anything? Sophia stared at the screen for a moment before typing a response. Sophia, he admitted he knew my mom. He says they were in love. And there's a chance he might be my biological father. The reply came almost instantly. Emily, what? Are you okay? Sophia hesitated. Was she okay? She didn't know. Her emotions were a tangled web of confusion, anger, and a strange sort of longing she couldn't quite place. Sophia, I don't know. He gave me the necklace back. He wants to get to know me. Emily, do you want that? That was the question, wasn't it? Did she want to open that door, knowing it could change everything she thought she knew about herself? She sighed, slipping the necklace back into her bag. Sophia, I'm not sure. I need time to think. As she put her phone away, a new thought struck her. If Michael Callahan had cared so deeply for her mother, why hadn't he been there when they needed him most? Her mother had struggled after Sophia's father died, working long hours to make ends meet. If Michael was her biological father, why hadn't he reached out? Why had he let them fend for themselves? The thought simmered in her mind as she walked home. She tried to push it aside, telling herself she didn't have all the answers yet. But the anger refused to be silenced. Back in her apartment, she spread her mother's old photographs and letters across the coffee table again. There had to be more pieces of the puzzle here, something that would explain the choices her mother had made, or that Michael had made. She picked up another letter, this one from her mother to Aunt Margaret. Dear Margaret, I've made my decision. Michael and I come from two different worlds, and I can't let Sophia grow up caught in the middle of that. I've told him it's over, and I've asked him to respect my wishes. I know it's for the best, but it still hurts. Sophia is my everything now. I'll do whatever it takes to give her the life she deserves, even if it means doing it alone. Elena. Sophia stared at the letter, her heart aching for her mother. She could feel the love and determination in her words, but also the pain of letting go of someone she had clearly cared deeply for. Her mother had chosen to walk away, to protect her from the complications of being tied to the Callahan family. But had it really been her choice, or had she been forced into it? Another thought crept into Sophia's mind. Michael had claimed he tried to find her mother later. What if he hadn't known about her at all? What if he had been kept in the dark, just like she had? The questions piled up, each one more frustrating than the last. She decided to call Aunt Margaret again. "Hello, dear," Margaret answered, her voice warm. "Did you find what you were looking for with Michael?" "I don't know yet," Sophia admitted. "I found another letter Mom wrote to you. She said she asked Michael to stay away, that she didn't want him involved." "Do you know why she made that decision?" Margaret sighed heavily. "Your mother was a proud woman, Sophia. She didn't want to be dependent on anyone, especially not the Callahans. She knew their family wouldn't approve of her, and she didn't want to put you in the middle of their judgment. But Michael says he tried to find her later. Do you think he knew about me?" Margaret hesitated. "I don't think he did. Your mother was very careful about that. She didn't want him to feel obligated or for you to feel unwanted. She thought she was doing what was best." Sophia leaned back against the couch, her mind racing. "Do you think I should try to get to know him?" "I think that's a decision only you can make," Margaret said gently. "But if you do, just be cautious. The Callahans have always been complicated people." Sophia thanked her and hung up, feeling no closer to clarity. She stared at the necklace on the table, its delicate chain catching the light. If her mother had gone to such lengths to keep her away from the Callahans, was she betraying her by even considering building a relationship with Michael? Or was she honoring her mother by uncovering the truth? The next day, Sophia found herself standing outside Callahan Enterprises once again. She hadn't planned to come back so soon, but something inside her told her she needed to talk to Michael again. This time, she wanted real answers, about her mother, about his absence, about everything. The assistant greeted her with a polite nod, clearly surprised to see her. "Mr. Callahan wasn't expecting you, Miss Reyes, but I'll let him know you're here." Sophia waited in the lobby, her heart pounding. She felt out of place in the grand building, surrounded by people who seemed so polished and confident. But she wasn't going to let her insecurities stop her. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. When Michael finally appeared, his expression was unreadable. "Sophia, this is unexpected." "I know," she said, standing her ground. "But I need to talk to you. I need to understand why things happened the way they did." He gestured toward his office. "Let's talk." Sophia followed him, her nerves buzzing. Once they were seated, she wasted no time. "My mother told you to stay away," she began. "I found her letters. She thought she was protecting me. But you said you tried to find her later. Why didn't you?" Michael sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I did try, Sophia. After my father passed away and I was free to make my own decisions, I searched for her. But by then she had moved, and I didn't know where to find her. I didn't have many resources back then. I was still rebuilding the business." "You could have tried harder," Sophia said, her voice sharp. "She struggled after my dad died. She worked so hard to give me a good life." "And where were you?" "I didn't know about you," Michael said quietly. "If I had, I would have done everything in my power to be there for both of you." "Do you really expect me to believe that?" Sophia demanded, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "You had all the money, all the resources. And yet, you just let her disappear?" Michael met her gaze, his expression pained. "I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. I failed her. And I failed you. But I can't change the past, Sophia. All I can do is try to make amends now." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. Part of her wanted to believe him, to let herself feel the warmth of having a father again. But another part of her was still angry, still hurt by the years of absence and the struggles her mother had endured alone. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Not yet. I understand, Michael said softly. Take all the time you need. But please know that my offer still stands. If you want to get to know me, I'm here. Sophia nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She stood and left the office without another word, clutching the necklace in her hand. The world outside felt both brighter and heavier as she stepped onto the bustling street. Her life was changing and there was no going back. Sophia didn't go straight home after leaving Michael's office. The emotions swirling within her were too overwhelming to be confined to her small apartment. She wandered aimlessly through the city streets, clutching her bag tightly, the weight of the necklace pressing against her side like a constant reminder of everything that had just happened. She passed coffee shops, boutiques, and bustling intersections without really seeing them. Her mind was stuck on the conversation with Michael, replaying his words over and over again. Could she believe him? Did he truly not know about her? And even if he didn't, why hadn't he tried harder to find her mother? Those questions gnawed at her, fueling the anger she felt bubbling beneath the surface. But the anger wasn't directed entirely at Michael, it was directed at herself as well. A small part of her wanted to forgive him, to allow him into her life, to finally have some semblance of a father figure again. But was that desire born out of longing or desperation? She finally stopped at a small park she used to visit with her mother when she was a child. The memories came flooding back as she sat on one of the old wooden benches, her fingers tracing the grooves worn into the wood over the years. This had been one of their favorite places, a little haven where her mother could escape the stresses of work and life, if only for an hour or two. They would sit here and share stories, her mother spinning tales of magic and wonder that always left Sophia wide-eyed and smiling. Sophia pulled out the necklace and let it dangle from her fingers. The delicate pendant swayed gently in the breeze, catching the afternoon sunlight. It felt surreal to hold it again, to feel the cool metal against her skin. This piece of jewelry had meant so much to her mother, and now it felt like it was tethering Sophia to a past she didn't fully understand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. It was a text from Emily. "Emily, are you okay? You've been quiet all day." Sophia hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "Sophia, I talked to Michael again. He admitted he didn't know about me. He says he tried to find Mom but couldn't. Emily, do you believe him?" Sophia stared at the message, unsure how to answer. After a moment, she typed, "Sophia, I want to, but I'm not sure. I don't know what to feel. Emily, it's okay to feel conflicted, sophomore. This is a lot to process. Just take it one step at a time." Sophia sighed, grateful for Emily's support. She put her phone away and leaned back on the bench, closing her eyes. One step at a time. It sounded so simple, but in reality, it felt impossible. Her life had been turned upside down, and she didn't know where to begin putting the pieces back together. That evening, Sophia sat in her apartment, staring at the necklace on the coffee table. She had spent hours trying to distract herself, watching TV, cleaning, even attempting to cook a meal she didn't really have the appetite for, but nothing worked. The necklace demanded her attention, as though it were alive, pulling her back to the questions she wasn't ready to face. Finally, she picked up her laptop and began searching for information about the Callahan family. Articles, interviews, and even gossip columns painted a picture of wealth, power, and scandal. Michael Callahan had inherited the family fortune after his father's death, transforming the business into the empire it was today. But what caught Sophia's attention was a mention of Michael's strained relationship with his father. One article described how Michael had been disinherited for a time in the 1980s, only to be reinstated after his father's passing. Sophia's brow furrowed as she read. If Michael had been disinherited during the time he was with her mother, it would explain why he hadn't been able to provide for them. But it didn't explain why he hadn't fought harder to stay in their lives. She found herself clicking through page after page, searching for anything that might shed light on his actions. It was a fruitless endeavor. Most of what she found was surface-level information, carefully curated to maintain the Callahan family's image. Frustrated, she closed the laptop and leaned back on the couch. If she wanted real answers, she would have to get them directly from Michael. But was she ready for that? Could she handle whatever truths he might reveal? The next morning, Sophia woke up with a sense of resolve. She couldn't keep running from this. The only way to move forward was to confront her past, no matter how painful it might be. She decided to accept the job at Callahan Enterprises, not because she was ready to embrace Michael as a father, but because it was an opportunity to uncover the truth. Working closely with him would give her the chance to ask the questions she needed answered, and to decide for herself if he deserved a place in her life. She sent the email accepting the position and received a reply within minutes, confirming her start date the following week. As she stared at the message, a mix of nerves and determination coursed through her. This was it. She was stepping into the unknown, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. The first day at Callahan Enterprises was a whirlwind. Sophia was introduced to her new team, given a tour of the office, and thrown into a sea of paperwork and training modules. Everyone was professional and polite, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't quite belong. The luxury of the office, the polished demeanor of her coworkers, it all felt foreign to her. Michael stopped by her desk briefly to welcome her, his tone formal but warm. It was clear he was making an effort to keep things professional, likely to avoid putting her in an awkward position. Sophia appreciated the gesture, but it didn't make things any easier. Every time she saw him, she was reminded of the unresolved questions between them. Over the next few days, Sophia found herself growing more comfortable in her role. She immersed herself in her work, using it as a distraction from the complicated emotions that lingered beneath the surface. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the pull of the past. One afternoon, as she was organizing files in the archives, she stumbled across an old photograph. It was tucked into the back of a folder, yellowed with age but still clear. The image showed a young Michael Callahan standing next to her mother, Elena. They were smiling, their arms around each other, and the love between them was unmistakable. Sophia's heart ached as she stared at the photo. This was the proof she hadn't realized she needed. Her mother and Michael had truly cared for each other. But what had gone so wrong that her mother felt she had to walk away? The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She quickly slipped the photo into her pocket as Michael appeared in the doorway. "Finding everything you need?" he asked, his tone light. "Yes," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just getting familiar with the archives?" He nodded, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "I hope you're finding the job fulfilling." "I am," she said, though the words felt hollow. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, his expression softening. She took a deep breath. "Why did my mom feel like she had to walk away from you? Was it really just about your family?" Michael's expression grew somber. He leaned against the doorway, his gaze distant. "It was more than that. My father was a difficult man. He didn't just disapprove of Elena, he actively tried to sabotage our relationship. He threatened her, made her feel like she wasn't good enough. I tried to fight him, but she decided it was best for both of us to let go. She said she didn't want me to lose everything because of her." Sophia's chest tightened. "Did you agree with her?" "No," he said firmly. "I wanted to be with her, no matter what. But she made her choice, and I had to respect it." "Did you ever try to contact her after your father passed?" Michael nodded. "I did. But by then she had moved and I couldn't find her. I didn't have many resources at the time, I was still rebuilding my life. And when I finally got back on my feet, I didn't know where to start looking. I always hoped she would reach out, but she never did." Sophia swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "She was scared," she said softly. "She thought she was protecting me." Michael met her gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "I wish I had known. I would have done everything differently." Sophia didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe him, to let go of the anger she had been holding onto. But another part of her wasn't ready to forgive so easily. "I need some time," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Michael said gently. "I'm here whenever you're ready." As she left the archives, the photograph still tucked in her pocket, Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions. The truth was slowly unraveling, piece by piece, but she still wasn't sure how to reconcile it with the life she had known. All she could do was take it one day at a time. Sophia spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but her thoughts kept circling back to the photograph she had found and Michael's words in the archives. She replayed their conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every expression. The regret in his eyes had seemed genuine, but how could she be sure? How could she trust a man who had been absent for so much of her life, even if his absence wasn't entirely his fault? When she finally returned home that evening, she placed the photograph on her coffee table, staring at it as though it might offer some new revelation. Her mother's smile was so radiant, so full of life. And Michael, young and hopeful, looked like a man in love. It was hard to reconcile the man in the picture with the one she knew now, the composed and distant millionaire who seemed so careful in every interaction. Sophia sighed and poured herself a cup of tea, hoping it might calm her restless mind. She pulled out her mother's old letters again, flipping through them for anything she might have missed. Most of them were addressed to Aunt Margaret, filled with updates about Sophia's childhood and reflections on her mother's struggles. But one letter stood out. Its tone was different, more vulnerable. Dear Margaret, I've made peace with my decision, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Every time I see Sophia smile, I wonder if Michael would see the same spark in her eyes that I do. She's so much like him in ways I can't explain. Her curiosity, her determination, even the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. But I did what I had to do. Michael's father was a man who didn't take no for an answer. He made it clear that if I didn't leave, he would ruin Michael's life, and possibly mine too. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let Sophia grow up in the shadow of that man's anger and control. I only hope that one day, when she's older, she'll understand why I made the choices I did. And maybe, just maybe, she'll forgive me. Elena. Sophia's chest tightened as she read the words. Her mother had sacrificed so much to protect her, to ensure she grew up in a stable environment, free from the Callahan family's influence. But it had come at a cost, her mother's happiness and perhaps her own. She couldn't help but wonder how different her life might have been if things had turned out another way. The next morning, Sophia woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't let herself be consumed by what-ifs. The past was the past, and while she couldn't change it, she could try to make sense of it. She decided to visit Aunt Margaret again, hoping her mother's sister could help fill in some of the gaps. When she arrived at Margaret's house, the older woman greeted her warmly, ushering her inside and offering her a cup of tea. The cozy living room, filled with family photos and knickknacks, felt like a safe haven, a place where Sophia could untangle her thoughts. Margaret sat across from her, studying her with a gentle but inquisitive expression. "You've got that look again," she said. "The one that says your mind is racing a mile a minute." Sophia smiled faintly. "You always could read me too well. So, what's on your mind?" Margaret asked, leaning back in her chair. Sophia hesitated for a moment before pulling out the photograph and placing it on the table between them. "I found this at the office," she said. "I think it's from the time Mom and Michael were together." Margaret picked up the photo, her lips pressing into a thin line as she examined it. "I remember this day," she said softly. "Your mother sent me this picture back when she still believed things might work out between them. What happened to change that?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret sighed, setting the photo down. Michael's father, Charles Callahan, was a ruthless man. He cared about power and reputation more than anything else. When he found out about your mother, he was furious. He saw her as a threat to the family's image, someone who didn't belong in their world. He made her life miserable, sending her threatening letters, showing up unannounced to intimidate her. Eventually, he gave her an ultimatum: leave Michael, or he would destroy her and Michael both. Sophia's hands tightened around her tea mug. "Why didn't Michael fight back?" "He tried," Margaret said gently. "But Charles had control over everything. Michael's finances, his career, even his reputation. Your mother didn't want Michael to lose everything because of her. She thought she was doing the right thing by walking away." Sophia looked down at the photograph, her emotions swirling. "Did Mom ever regret it?" Margaret's eyes softened. "She never said it outright, but I think she did. She loved your father dearly, and she was grateful for the life they built together. But there was always a part of her that wondered what might have been." Sophia nodded, her thoughts heavy. "Thank you for telling me this," she said. "It helps to understand, even if it doesn't make it any easier." Margaret reached across the table, squeezing Sophia's hand. "Whatever you decide to do, just remember that your mother loved you more than anything. Every choice she made was for you." Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "I know." Over the next few weeks, Sophia threw herself into her work at Callahan Enterprises. The routine gave her a sense of stability, something to hold on to as she navigated the complicated emotions surrounding Michael and her mother's past. She worked late most nights, poring over reports and presentations, determined to prove herself in her new role. Michael stopped by her desk occasionally, offering words of encouragement or asking about her progress. Their interactions were always brief and professional, but Sophia could sense the undercurrent of something unspoken between them. She wasn't ready to address it yet, and he seemed to respect that. One evening, as she was packing up for the day, Michael appeared in the doorway of her office. "Got a minute?" he asked. Sophia hesitated before nodding. "Sure." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've been meaning to ask, how are you settling in? Are you finding everything you need?" "I am," she said. "The team's been great, and the work is interesting. It's a lot to take in, but I'm managing." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. I know this situation isn't exactly normal, and I appreciate how professional you've been." Sophia studied him for a moment, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said before, about my mom, and why things ended the way they did." "And?" Michael prompted, his tone careful. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I believe you tried to find her, and I believe you cared about her. But that doesn't mean it's easy for me to process. My mom sacrificed so much to protect me, and it's hard not to feel conflicted." Michael's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though her words had lifted a weight he'd been carrying. "I understand," he said. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything. I can't change the past, but I want to be here for you now, if you'll let me." Sophia looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together nervously. "I don't know what a relationship with you would even look like," she admitted. "But I'm willing to try, to get to know you." A small, tentative smile crossed Michael's face. "That's all I could hope for." The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of understanding. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. That weekend, Michael invited Sophia to dinner at his home. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready for something so personal, but ultimately decided to accept. If she was going to move forward, she needed to see this through. The Callahan estate was even grander than she had imagined, a sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. As she stepped inside, she was struck by the elegance of the interior, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the art that adorned the walls. It was a world so far removed from her own that it felt almost surreal. Michael greeted her warmly, leading her to a cozy dining room that felt more intimate than she had expected. The table was set for two, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm ambience over the room. "I wanted this to be a chance for us to talk," Michael said as they sat down. "No pressure, no distractions." Sophia nodded, her nerves settling slightly. "Thank you." Over the course of the meal, they talked about everything and nothing. Her work, his business, their shared love of books. Slowly, the walls between them began to come down, and Sophia found herself feeling more at ease. By the end of the evening, she realized something important. Michael wasn't just the man she had built up in her mind, the distant, imposing figure who had been absent from her life. He was human, flawed and complex, just like everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for him after all. As she left the estate that night, the necklace resting against her collarbone, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt like she was ready to face it.